Now in this session I'm going to talk about final keyword. Final is a keyword or modifier applicable to variables, methods and classes. Final is a keyword, so we can apply this final keyword to the variables, methods and classes. In variables, it may be any variable, it may be instance variable, it may be static variable, it may be local variable. For all variables, you can apply final keyword. Coming to final variables, so final variable means, so if any variable declared with the final keyword, if any variable, if it is a declared with the final keyword, its value cannot be modified and we can make a variable as a constant. If any variable, if it is a declared with a final, so then it becomes a final variable. So declaring final variable is nothing but you cannot change that value, means you cannot perform reassignment operation. So if you want to make any variable as a constant, we can use a final keyword. We must initialize a final variable, otherwise the compiler will generate a compile time error. Means initialization is a mandatory. Initialization is a mandatory. If you are not initializing, so then compiler will generate error. So that is compile time error. As per Java documentation, final variable naming convention should be all uppercase. Should be all uppercase. If you have a multiple words, use underscore to separate words. If you have a multiple words, use underscore to separate words. And if you have a single word, you have to use what? All uppercase. Suppose if you take an example, so public static final double pi. So I want to represent the pi value. So this is a pi value pi. All are uppercase, and here I am declaring this as a final keyword so that it will not change. So we can make this pi as a constant, and this is the value. So this value, once if you declare this value, we cannot modify this value anymore. During execution of my program, so we cannot change this value anymore. So the reason this variable is declare it as a final keyword. And as I said, so initialization is a mandatory for final variable. Now, how to initialize a variable? How to initialize a final variable? There are three ways. There are three ways to initialize a final variable. The first way is a regular one. You can initialize a final variable when it is a declare. When it is a declare. At the time of declaration only, you can initialize. It's very common. And so second way is if a blank final variable can be initialized inside instance block, or you can use a constructor. As we know that, so it is a possible to overload a constructor, means in a class you can write any number of constructors. So in your class, if you have a multiple constructor, in all constructor you have to initialize the final variable. If not, it will generate the compilation error. Okay, so all these points we will see the programmatically. Next, a blank final static variable. See here, it is a static. Final static variable can be initialized inside static block. If it is an instance variable, you can initialize in final variable inside instance block. If it is a static final, you have to initialize inside static block. So suppose if you take an example, I have a class a final variable. And so suppose if you take it's a regular one, so I have declared what pi value. So at the time of declaration, here I have assigned this value. Here I have performed initialization operation. This is the first case, very regular one. Now coming to second one, so here I have declared a variable that is I. and I have declared one more variable, that is a j. Now I want to initialize this value. I want to initialize I value. So it is possible to use instance block, or you can use a constructor. Inside a constructor, I am initialize my I value. So final variable initialization inside a constructor block. In constructor block, you can initialize a final variable, and this is called instance block. So this is called instance block. Inside instance block also you can initialize a final variable. So I have one more final variable, that is int j. So that j value here I have initialized inside instance block. Inside instance block. Now I have one more final variable, but this time it is a static final. Okay, and this is the naming convention, database version. So here I have two words, so you have to use underscore to separate this word. Now I want to initialize this static final variable inside static block. Inside static block, this is called static block. Means if any block, if it is a declared with a static, then it becomes a static block. So inside static block you can initialize static final variables. This is the static final variable. The variable name is a database version. So that database version here I have initialized inside static area, means inside static block. This many ways you can initialize final variables, and if you have a multiple constructors, you have to perform initialization in all constructors. Okay, so let's see all these points are programmatically. So I have a final variable class. So here I'm taking the void main method. Now as per example, so first is what, here I'm taking int I, okay, int pi equals to 3.14 something. I'm taking 3.14 something, and I'm declaring it as final. I'm declaring it as a final. Okay, so here I'm taking this as a double type. Now this is a very regular one. Now as we know that, so here it is a declared. So suppose if you want to change this value, like, so suppose if you want to perform reassign operation, so it is not possible. Pi equals to, so before that, yes, here I'm taking final static, so taking it as a final equals to, suppose if I assign 1 2 3 something, 1 2 3 point something, so it is not possible. It is not possible. The reason, once if you compile this program, cannot assign a value to the final variable pi, right? Means once if it is a declare it as a final, if any variable, if it is a declared at the final, you cannot change that value anymore. Means you cannot perform a reassignment operation. So that is the point number one, and this is a very normal declaration, very common declaration, and the variable assignment. Now coming to second one, so suppose if you take like int I, now here I'm declaring it as a final. So for instance variable, so initializations are not mandatory, but if you declare any instance variable, so with the final keyword, initialization is a mandatory. So suppose if you run this program, here you will get a compilation error. So variable I not initialized in the default constructor. Okay, so you have to initialize, so how to initialize means, so we have different ways. Either you can use instance block, or you can use what, a constructor. So suppose if I have a instance block, this is called instance block. If anything is not defining here. So this block is nothing but it's an instance block. Inside instance block, it is you can perform initialization like this. It is a possible. Now see here, it is a final variable, and inside instance block you can initialize a final variable. And suppose if you take a variable like int final int j, and I want to initialize this value, again here you are getting error. I want to initialize inside what constructor. So final variable, I am declaring a constructor. So just assign some value like 100. Now this is another way to initialize final variable. Now suppose if it is a static final like final or static int database version database version. So I want to initialize, see this database version is a variable name of a final. So this final variable must be what all capital letters. So as per Java documentation, all variable name character must be in capital letter. If you have a multiple words, you have to use underscore. Okay, here I have two words, so I have used underscore here. Now I want to initialize this value. So this variable is declared as a static and final. So it is a static member. So all static members you have to initialize within static block and database version equal to 1. Now it is a possible. Now coming to this one, so inside constructor you can initialize the value. So suppose I have multiple constructors like so final variable and int some I, and this is one variable. Now see here, now again it is showing some error. So again you have to initialize value like, now it is a possible. So suppose if you have a one more constructor like int j. Now so here initialization is mandatory. Suppose if you remove, here you will get error. How many constructors you have in your program, so that many times you have to perform the initialization operation, otherwise here you will get error. So this is about final variable. So final variable means if any variable, if it is a declared with a final keyword, then it becomes a final variable. Final variables are non-modifiable variables, means once if you declare a variable, we cannot modify that variable, means we cannot reassign the variable. And initialization is a mandatory for all final variables. So how to initialize a final variable means we have three ways. So first one is a regular one. So that is what at the time of declaration only you can initialize the final variable. And so second one is you can initialize a final variable inside instance block or inside a constructor. If you have a multiple constructor, in all constructors you have to perform initialization. And if it is a final static member, so then you have to initialize within the static block. This is about final variables. Next one, final class. When a class is declared with a final keyword, it is called final class. Simple. When a class is declared with a final keyword, it is called final class. If a class is declared as a final, then we cannot inherit that class. That is, we cannot create any child class for that final class. Means all final classes are not participate in inheritance concept. Suppose if you take an example, string class. String is a final class. String is a final class. For string, we cannot create any child classes. String class is not participating in inheritance concept, so we cannot create any child class to the string class because string is the final class. So suppose if you take an example, I have a class parent. If I declare this parent as a final, if you declare a class with a final, then it is called what? Final class. Final class. If any class, if it is declared with the final, we cannot inherit that class anymore. Means we cannot create any child class. Suppose I have a child class and here I am extending a parent. Means I am trying to create a child class to the parent, but it is not possible. At compile time it will give error. So child class is not possible here and it will generate compilation error. If you want, we can verify. I have a class that is a parent class. I have a class parent and I'm trying to create one more class that is a public class child. Now I have a class parent and I have one more class child. Now if a class, if it is a declared with a final, if it is a declared with a final, then it becomes a final class. Means you cannot create child class to the this final class, that is a parent class. Suppose if I create parent child class to the parent class, now here you will get error. See here. So suppose if you run this program, before that, cannot inherit from final parent, cannot inherit from final parent. The reason, this class is declared with a final, so that's why we cannot inherit this class anymore. Means we cannot create child classes to the final class. So it is also not possible to take string class. The reason, string class is declared as a final. So if you take a documentation of the string class, so this is a string class. This string class internally implemented and it is a, declared with as a final keyword. So this string class we cannot inherit. So it is also not possible. Every method present inside a final class always final. Every method inside final class always final. But every variable present inside final class need not be final. Suppose if I take an example, so I have a class demo and I have a variable that is int a equals to 10 and m1. This is a method 1. And this class is a final class. This class is a final class. So in final class, all methods by default final. So you cannot override those methods. And but variables need not be final. Okay, here I have a equals to 10 and here again I am modifying the existing object or existing variable, that is a plus 100. Now what will happen means, so it will print 110. 110 means here you are trying to changing variable. It is a possible, but you cannot override m1 and you cannot create a child class to the variable, sorry, this final class. But a variable can be non-final. A variable can be non-final. So this is the point. What the point means? Every method present inside final class always final by default. But every variable present inside final need not be final. It may be normal variable, but it is not a final. You can change that variable, no problem. Now, next one, final method. If a method is declared with a final keyword, it is called final method. A final method cannot be overridden. Means we cannot override final methods. Overriding concept is not applicable for final methods. If you want to restrict the implementation of a method, then you can declare it as a final. Means sometimes you need to restrict your method implementation. In that case, you have to declare your method as a final. For example, suppose if you take an object class, we can override some methods like equals method, toString method, but you can't override methods like wait, notify, and notify all. First two methods you can override, next three methods you cannot override. The reason, so object class. So object class is a supermost class in Java. So it consists total 11 methods. Those 11 methods, some methods are final and some are non-final methods. Equals and toString methods are non-final methods, and wait, notify all are final methods. So equals and toString we can override, and wait, notify all or we cannot override, because so these methods are declared as a final. So suppose if we take an example, suppose I have a program. So here, as we know that, so every class in Java directly or indirectly child class of object. So here I'm extending object class. So if you want to see the documentation, in this object class, it is a normal class. It is not a final class. It is a normal class. So here we have total 11 methods. Get class method. It's a final method. Next, notify all method. It's a final method. We cannot override. So next, wait method. It's a final method. So wait also not possible to perform overriding operation. Next, see here equals method returns a boolean, but it is not a final, so you can override equals method. The same the way you have clone, that is also fine, you can override. Yeah. Next one is the toString. So toString is also returns a string, but it is not a final, so you can override this method. So suppose if you override these methods like first toString, it is a possible to override. So whatever the code you want, so whatever the logic you want, here you can implement, here you can write. And same the way you can override equals method. Equals method also it is a possible to override. But if you're trying to override notify, it is not possible. Same the way if you're trying to override wait method, it is also not possible. So all non-final methods you can override, all final methods we cannot override. So suppose if you take an example, I have a class parent and I'm extending the parent class here. Now in parent class, I have a method like method public void, like m1 is one method, m1 is a one method, and here implementation like it is wishing println. So good morning, good morning. And you have m2 method. Here you have good night. Now I want to override m1 and m2. Now m1 is a normal method, m2 I'm declaring it as a final. Now you can override m1 but you cannot override m2. So overriding should be done in child class. So this is a child class. Just override m1. So m1 is a possible. Now whatever the implementation you want, here you can write. So if you want, you can take same implementation, or you can write your own code. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. So this is my implementation. So it is a possible. Here you can override the same one, but it is not possible to override m2. It is not possible to override m2. So public void m2 is not possible. M2 is not possible. Why means m2 is declared it as a final. So final methods we cannot override. Final methods we cannot override. Yeah, same example. So parent and the child. So here we have m1 method, and m1 method same. Here you can override, and m2 method is declared as a final, so you cannot override. So if you, even if you're trying to override, here you will get a compilation error. Now here we have some important points. The main advantage of final modifier is we can achieve the security. Means no one can be allowed to change your implementation. So sometimes we need to restrict our method implementation. In that case, you can use final modifier. So final modifier provides the security, but at the same way, so we are missing object-oriented principles, object-oriented benefits like inheritance and polymorphism. Okay, so the main disadvantage is what? The main disadvantage of final keyword is we are missing key benefits of object-oriented principles like inheritance and polymorphism. Hence, if you have a specific requirement, you can use, but it never recommended to use a final modifier. So why it is not recommended means, so we are missing the benefits of object-oriented principles like inheritance and polymorphism. This is about final keyword in Java.